Today we're going to take a look at diet, and in particular the ways in which your diet might be influencing your baseline emotional state. This video is the third in a sort of short mini-series on the topic of male emotion. The first video was a more general overview of masculinity and emotion, the way in which those two topics relate to each other. And the second video was on music and the ways in which most people are heavily influenced in their baseline emotional state by constantly listening to music and specific types of music as well. If you haven't seen those two videos, it's going to be linked somewhere up here. Go ahead and check them out first. And I'm actually going to record most of this video at home, probably, because it's actually time to eat for me. I have only brought a little bit of food, so I'll be having a little bit of food, and then I'll be heading home to have the rest of my breakfast there and record the video as I do. Because thematically, of course, this is actually quite a good fit for what I'm talking about. So the reason I just opened my knife here is because I'm having cheese. Of course, cheese, very easy to take places, so that's one of the reasons why I brought it. But cheese is actually one of the foods that I do eat, because there are very few things I eat. This wasn't always the case, but in the last year or so, I've really transformed the way I eat. I've really transformed my diet. And at this point, I've kind of settled on a sort of pastoralist diet. So what I eat is meat, eggs, and dairy products, milk, cheese, butter, those types of things. I also specifically avoid eating too many carbs because that would pull me out of ketosis. Yes, I'm on a keto diet. So I don't drink copious amounts of milk every day because milk does have a pretty decent sugar content. And yeah, that would break my ketosis. So these are essentially the two aspects when it comes to my diet. One, the specific things I eat, and then two, the macros I'm going for. High protein, getting most of my energy from fat, and very little carbohydrates. In fact, so few that I'm constantly in ketosis. Now, a lot of people, when they hear about my diet, when they hear about what I eat, and in particular about what I don't eat, they have a lot of different concerns. Number one, most often, the thing that people bring up is, I would miss this, I would miss that. All of these different types of food. Oh, I could never go without XYZ. Or just tasty food in general, right? Which is funny because this shit is tasty as fuck right now. But I think most of you know what they're talking about. They're talking about, heavily spiced food that is made out of a whole shopping list of different ingredients. Man, insects are going hard today. I recorded another video just earlier, and they are really tripping balls right now. Anyways, what they mean by tasty food usually is, again, heavily spiced food that contains carbs and fat, especially maybe a little bit of protein as well. So kind of everything, right? Lots of different flavors. It's salty, it's a little bit sweet, it's kind of savory. Maybe it has a bit of a sour note in there as well. It's basically a little bit of everything. And I've already mentioned this in a video I made in the past about diet, but beyond my sort of feelings regarding this, right? Beyond me personally and the way I personally eat. If you really think about it, this is kind of funny. Because obviously that is not the default state of being for a human. Neither for a fully grown adult human who would exist in a natural setting, right, in his natural habitat that humans have actually evolved for, nor for a sort of modern human, if you will, untouched by the evils of the modern world. A baby. If you think about babies and toddlers, right, young kids, they don't like complex food. Not at all. And if we ignore texture for a second, if we just look at taste for a moment, and the types of taste that toddlers, even kids that are 5, 6, 7 years old, like young kids, gravitate towards, they like simple shit. They like really, really basic food. They don't like the sort of, exquisite cuisine. That's not what kids want, generally speaking. You can get a kid used to all kinds of different food, right? Video just cut off because my breakfast alarm actually went off, so I'm going to go ahead and head home real quick, and then I'm going to continue talking about this topic. The fuck kind of duck is that? That's a normal duck, right? The fuck is that, bro? Hey, yo. What is that? I'm gonna try to get closer, bro. I've never seen that shit before. Wild. All right, back home. Got my eggs cooking in the pot. Got a little bit of milk here until they are ready. And I believe I was talking about young kids and their preferences when it comes to food, as well as potentially more primal humans. So adult humans as well, but those who have not been influenced by modern society, by the stuff people in modern day-to-day life eat, but instead live in a more natural habitat that humans evolved in. Now, as I mentioned, children prefer simpler foods, and not just babies, not just toddlers, but even if we're looking at 6, 7, maybe 8-year-olds, like younger children, they prefer simple foods that don't have a super complex taste profile, that are generally very generic in their makeup. Now, of course, depending on what your parents have been feeding you, this is going to vary a little bit, but I think we can all perceive this general tendency in young people. Now, if we look at people who are adults but live in more primal societies, hunter-gatherer type contexts, we will also see that they eat very simple foods, and they don't seem to be bothered by it in any way, shape, or form. Now, you might say, well, yeah, that's because they don't know all of this great food exists. Maybe, but this whole idea already speaks to what I'm kind of getting at. You're not eating tasty food because
necessarily you're just deeply appreciative of the culinary arts, to put it poetically. You're eating tasty food because you are reliant on it. Your baseline emotional state, which again, this video is primarily about or supposed to be focused on, is influenced by you not getting tasty food. You're actually going to be in a bad mood even if you get everything you need, right? Like macro wise, let's say, or even in terms of micronutrients. You get decent quality food, right? Healthy food, food that has everything you need, and you're still going to feel bad. That isn't healthy. That isn't natural. People saying, oh, I could never eat the way you eat because I could never not have this food or that food, they are already inadvertently admitting to the fact that they are addicted to tasty food, which should not be the case. You should not be addicted to anything you consume. In the last video, we talked about music, obviously. Another thing that's very easily accessible, and you might think, well, it doesn't cost anything. I can listen to music for free. Why shouldn't I constantly listen to music? Because you get used to listening to music, now it's actually, if you look at it midterm, long term, it's not actually a dopamine boost anymore. It's just to keep you at baseline because you've gotten used to always listening to music. So your new baseline in terms of dopamine assumes that you're listening to music. And when you're not listening to music, you're actually at a deficit. And the same thing goes for food. This is a way in which food very fundamentally impacts people's emotional state. People will be in a bad mood. People will feel bad about themselves. People will get angry, pissy, just be unpleasant to be around. And not just for others, for themselves as well. They will struggle to focus. They will struggle to feel motivated to do things if they don't get their tasty food. And depending on the type of person, depending on the context we're talking about, maybe even specific types of food. Oh, I really crave this food right now. Oh, I'm really in the mood for that specific dish. This is an absurd level of decadence. But more importantly, regarding emotional states, it means you being comfortable in your skin, being somewhat satisfied, but still hungry to do stuff, right? Hungry in the sense that you have a certain level of aggression. You're based, you're balanced, right? But still hungry. You being in that kind of state, you being able to be chill or be motivated, is reliant on certain types of food. Types of food, mind you, that you don't need. Because, of course, food is a necessity. We're not talking about getting angry because you don't have any food at all. Now, you should be able to go certain periods of time without having any food at all as well. But that is sort of one step further already. Just talking about having food, every couple of hours, having breakfast, lunch, dinner, say, but not having the specific meals you want, or not having super tasty meals in general. That should not be a detriment. That should not be something to be expected. Humans in a natural setting will eat just about anything that is edible and that they can get their hands on. Now, of course, we are not in a natural setting, so you don't have to act exactly as people in a natural setting would. But you do have to keep in mind that, evolutionarily speaking, you're not that different from these people. You're more or less the same animal. So your ability to perform is also very closely related to natural circumstances. And you can look at these people who live in very archaic societies as a sort of baseline. If they can only... Oh shit. Battery's low. We'll see. We'll see if this video cuts off again. If these people can live their life doing the things they do, eating the things they eat, and I am not capable of that, there's something off. There's something off, bro. Because these people are humans, right? And they're fine. They're not cranky as fuck because they haven't had their breakfast cereal. They've never even heard of breakfast cereal. They just eat like meat fried over a fire or some shit. Let's talk more specifically about specific types of food, maybe. I've mentioned already that on the topic of tasty food, right, versus just simple foods, you should be completely fine with simple foods. And I'm going to say more or less the same thing I said in the music-related video here. I'm not saying you can never have tasty food. I have something tasty. Most people would just consider these normal meals, which is already the problem. I have food like that on occasion, right? Sometimes maybe there's a family gathering, let's say, and my family has cooked something nice. I might have that, right? But this is the rare occasion. And you know what I've actually noticed? Since I've stopped constantly eating tasty food, and I eat a very simple diet, it's not actually that great. It's not that crazy. It's overhyped. A huge part of the sort of awesomeness, the deliciousness you associate with these foods, with these meals, is you just feeling like you need it. Once you're not hooked on that stuff anymore, you eat like a very basic, simple diet, and you try this stuff on occasion, you realize, yeah, it tastes good. It's not like it tastes bad. No, it's tasty. But so what? It's not that big a deal, honestly. It really isn't. So that maybe is a little bit of a positive outlook for you. If you're thinking, oh, it would be terrible to be on like a simple diet. No. It's pretty chill, actually. Specific foods, though. Okay, so simple foods, which, the less processed what you're eating is. And yes, complex cooking procedures are also processing, right? If you cook a meal and the meal contains more than a dozen ingredients, that's essentially processed food. It's just that you have processed the food yourself okay? And maybe the ingredients you used were healthy. It's probably going to be better than industrial grade food, right? Like processed food you would buy at a store. But you should still try to eat simpler foods, as in not using a bunch of different simple foods to process and create something yourself, actually eating simple foods. But which ones? Because there are better and worse simple organic foods. Those of you who have been following my channel for a while know that a year ago, more than a year ago now, I went on an experimental 4 weeks of carnivore. I wanted to try it out, see what it's really like. I'd been on carnivore kinda sorta in the past, but not really, because I didn't really research the diet or think about how it works. I was 18 or 19 at the time, and I was still like drinking soda and shit while eating meat. So the whole diet didn't really make sense. Last year, though, I decided to try out carnivore for real, go hard on it, and I was very positively surprised. Like, getting onto carnivore was a little bit hard. Sticking to it for the first week or so, maybe, I was very motivated. I enjoyed the sort of project that was this experiment. So it wasn't hard for me to not quit. But I will say other people might have quit during this time. But past like week 2, I think I talked about this in the video I made on those 4 weeks. You know, when the 3rd, 4th week rolled around, 4th week, I actually thought about this on multiple occasions. I could just stay on this diet. That's literally what I thought. Like, the challenge was almost over, and you might think, oh, just a few more days, then I get to eat tasty food again. That didn't go through my mind at all. In fact, I was actually kind of surprised how little I appreciated the tasty food I got the day after the challenge ended. I got like a bunch of, stuff, some sweet stuff, some soda, all kinds of different things. I ordered some, I think, burgers or something in the evening. And sure, it was tasty, but I didn't really appreciate it that much. I didn't really give that much of a fuck about it. Because I felt really good on carnivore. And since then, I've experimented with, sort of mixed forms. I've definitely eaten a lot more meat, a lot more fat, but I still had carbs. I tried eating meat and fat and having some vegetables, but cutting out things like bread, etc. And what I realized is, if you're getting your micronutrients, more or less, I'm also supplementing vitamin D. I occasionally supplement magnesium and potassium, I think it's called, kalium. If you're getting your micronutrients and you're getting enough calories and enough protein, you honestly feel great the less random shit you're putting in your body. And by random shit, I mean like various different kinds of vegetables and fruit and shit like that. I know this is still somewhat of a controversial take, though certainly not as controversial as carnivore was back when I first discovered it and made that sort of very silly attempt at hopping on carnivore, which was not really carnivore again. But it is still not really that accepted. The fact of the matter, though, is that my digestion is pristine. And this is where we get to the second point. Beyond craving certain foods or craving tasty food in general, something that can disrupt, or rather, I would say will disrupt, at least to some extent, your baseline emotional state is digestive issues. You might be more uncomfortable in public if you're constantly farting or burping. That shit can make you feel weird. Also, if you have a lot of gas inside your intestines, that just makes you feel uncomfortable. It makes you kind of queasy. And then there's also the factor to consider that if you constantly eat carbohydrates, if they are one of, if not your main source of energy, you will get carb cravings. So ignore tasty food for a moment, ignore craving sort of taste, right? Carbs have their whole entire own craving attached to them. When people say they feel hungry, usually what they actually mean is my carb reserves are burnt out and I'm starting to crave carbs. Most of the time when people say they're hungry, they're not actually really hungry yet. Carbs add like an extra instance of hunger into the mix. Because your body is not actively using fat as a source of energy. If you're consuming very little carbs, your body will constantly be using fat to fuel you. Now, if you intake carbs, your body will still use those as energy. But as long as they are low enough that your body feels it can't rely on the carbs, it will still consistently produce ketones, which will break down fat for energy. So you don't get the carb craving. You just get regular hungry, I guess it's what I'm going to call it. And this regular hunger creeps in much more slowly, much more consistently. It's not this weird kind of crash that you have with carbs. And people say, oh, well, just avoid sugar so you don't have that sugar crash. Carbs that are, let me actually think about what this is called in English. So carbohydrates essentially are these chains of sugar molecules, right? And people will say, well, you should avoid shorter carbohydrates, right? And you should opt for longer ones or have a mix. Those carbs are still used in a very similar way to sugar because they are still broken down into sugar by your body. It's still sugar. It's just sugar in a very long chain. Okay? Now, what people are doing when they are eating, let's say, starch, right, is they're not avoiding the carb crash per se, They're just eating types of carbohydrates that will supply the body with carb energy for long periods of time. If that energy runs out, the carb crash would still be there. It's just that you're trying to avoid it, right? Trying to dodge it by eating carbs that will last for a very long time, which sugar doesn't. It doesn't change anything about the carb crash, though. So I would generally actually recommend to most people to stay in ketosis unless you're going to do something that actually requires absurd amounts of energy. But I'm going to just go out here and say this, okay? I lift weights almost every day. I also run. I do martial arts. I do all kinds of stuff that requires a lot of energy. Okay, I walk a lot. Just even ignoring sports in my day-to-day life, I go a lot of places just by walking on foot. So I'm someone who, overall, I think compared to the average person, burns a lot of energy. It is not very often that I encounter an activity. In fact, I'm not sure I can think of any point that I've encountered an activity where I actually physically felt like I had too little energy to do the activity. And I know that there are people out there who have even run marathons on keto. Now, are they going to perform as well as someone who is just, overloading their body with carbs? Maybe not. And these are the types of situations, right? Extreme, super high energy activities where you might want to think about consuming carbs. But it's still possible. And I think that's the important thing to keep in mind here. So if people can run marathons while in ketosis, you, the average person watching this, can probably do just about anything in your day-to-day life while on keto. More specifically, though, I would not recommend being just on keto, but I would actually recommend getting onto a similar diet as the one I'm on. Now, I want to be very clear here. I am mainly going to recommend what I'm talking about here to men because my knowledge on the male body is far superior to my knowledge on the female body. And just in terms of hormone levels, things like that, things that might negatively impact your period, all these types of things, I want to be very careful here, okay? Because female hormonal levels are a delicate art, let's put it like that. And in general, I would recommend that you much rather take advice on this from a woman, but more importantly, a woman who obviously is more knowledgeable specifically on the female body. When it comes to men, I would actually recommend you cut out essentially all vegetables out of your diet. Fibers are absolute dog shit for your digestion. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Some people might click off this video at this point. I really don't care. I have read about this so much, and I thought, maybe this is just like propaganda or some form of confirmation bias, whatever. I tried this shit, guys. I've been more or less on carnivore, a little bit on-off because, again, on occasion, at a family gathering, I might have some food that the family cooked. But I've essentially more or less been on carnivore for months now. And last year, again, I was on carnivore, very clean, pretty fucking strict, for 4 weeks. My digestion is amazing. Pristine. No farting, no burping, no weird shit. I mean, I'm not saying I never ever burp even a single time. But you do have to keep in mind that I'm also bulking, so I'm eating a lot of food. And even despite this fact, despite the fact that I'm actually eating in a pretty substantial caloric surplus, while on a sort of carnivore diet, more of a pastoralist diet, as I mentioned in the beginning, even despite this fact, my digestion is very fucking smooth. Isn't that strange? If fibers were actually good for your digestion, why is mine so amazing? Why do I have zero fucking problems? No heartburn, no gas, nor stomach aches for that matter. Nothing. And ask yourselves this. If we go back to the example of young children, right? What do they not like? Beyond the more general, complex food, special kind of fancy types of food versus simpler foods, what types of foods specifically do kids not like? Vegetables. Kids like fruit. Fruit, sugary, sweet, maybe a little bit sour, right? Unsurprising, because fruit is actually what the plant wants you to eat. So you hopefully also consume the seeds and then shit them out somewhere, so a new plant can grow. So why would the plant not make the fruit as attractive, nutritionally speaking, as possible? By supplying an immediate, high-calorie source of energy, sugar. So kids like fruit, generally speaking, unless they are like really fucking weird, but also mainly the fruit that isn't weird and like chewy and has a lot of fiber to it. They like simple fruits. If I think about it, some of the fruits like kids really like is tangerines, for example. It's basically all water and sugar and some sourness to it as well. What else do kids like? They like meat. Kids love like chicken. Unsurprising. Chicken, one of the types of meat that has an incredible amino acid profile for humans. Okay. If you want to get really high quality protein, chicken. Unsurprisingly, kids love chicken. The list goes on. There are other types of food. Milk, of course, a very obvious one. Many kids also like cheese. Not the more, exquisite cheese, again, that has like special types of flavor that is very nutty or whatever the fuck. But like generic ass cheese, mozzarella, young Gouda, those types of cheese. Kids love that shit. You know what's in there? Protein and fat. But what kids very universally do not like are vegetables, are fibrous foods that are low nutritional value. They maybe have some beneficial micronutrients, but are mostly fiber. And that is unsurprising because vegetables, for the most part, taste like shit. And the few examples that might not taste like shit, I don't know, carrots maybe. Carrots don't taste like shit because they're a little bit sweet. Okay? So the thing that makes them not really taste like shit is actually what kind of distinguishes them from many other types of vegetables. And now there's going to be people saying, oh no, I really love vegetables. I love the taste of broccoli, blah, blah. Oh yeah, really? Are you saying that because you've been eating broccoli all your life? Or are you saying that because broccoli itself actually tastes good? If you think about it, did you love broccoli as like a fucking 5-year-old, 6-year-old? Hell no. And even if you didn't hate it, if you had the choice between eating a bunch of broccoli and having, I don't know, fucking mozzarella or chicken or a big glass of milk, would you have chosen the broccoli? I doubt it, bro. I fucking doubt it. This is not to say that I hate people cooking with vegetables. What I am saying, though, is that you should be aware of the fact that vegetables are absolutely fucking up your digestive system. Vegetables are the type of shit hunter-gatherers will eat if they don't get their hands on proper food. They will eat berries, fruits. They will hunt for meat, right? Which is probably one of the best sources of nutrition in the wild. Only if they have like no fucking other food sources available would they dig up fucking roots or start eating, the fucking branches of, of plants or some shit. That's not food. At least not human food. So if you want to have a pleasant digestive experience, let's put it like that, and eat the kind of food that goes down so smoothly that it keeps your emotional state nice and stable, try to stay away from eating lots of fiber. Try to stay away from eating lots of carbs. Now, I want to say, carbs can actually really spike your energy and also really spike your mood. I just said, fruit is something kids like, yeah. Sugar is kind of a tricky thing here, because sugar is an incredible stimulant and it can enhance your performance on mental and physical things for a brief period of time. But as with all stimulants, as with music, which I talked about in the last video, you eventually get to a point where you kind of expect that sugar jump. In the past, for work, I would fast for the first 2 hours or so. I would fast completely. And then after 2 hours of working, after I got out of bed, I would have some caffeine with sugar. I've talked about this in the past, that this is probably my favorite drug, my favorite recreational drug ever. Other people like to smoke or drink alcohol, whatever. One of the things that has been incredibly ingrained in me is caffeine, and I especially love caffeine with sugar. So this is something I would have for work. And after 2 hours of work, I would kind of be less focused. I would kind of be a little, right? I would take a short break. I would chill out for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, have some caffeine with sugar, and then continue to drink whatever I was drinking. Usually some mate. And I would get this huge boost and I would start working like crazy, right? But what I realized is sooner or later, I would get to a point where the stimulation wasn't the same anymore. And I would maybe have another one. I was very strict on when I was consuming caffeine to, keep a clean sleep cycle, that type of thing. But just the level of stimulation was not enough anymore. So I would have another one still before 12, before noon. But I wanted to have more sugar and more caffeine to get that same oomph. And that's really what happens with any and all stimulants you're going to use to enhance your performance. If you consistently use them, they are just becoming the new baseline. Eventually, that's what they're going to be. The new zero. Oh shit. Phone is turning off soon. Yeah, they're going to become your new zero, your new baseline. And now, if you don't get them, you're actually in a deficit, dopamine-wise. And if you do want an actual boost, you're going to need something on top of it. Same as with the music I talked about. When you're in ketosis, you are very consistently being supplied with energy. Your energy levels, if you sort of look at the mid to long term, might be a little bit lower. But they are very stable. You don't have this up and down of energy levels, then you eat something and then you're kind of you feel a little sluggish, and then the sugar kicks in, and then now you're really motivated, and then you have a crash, etc. Your energy is more like this. You have slight up and downs, but more or less like a straight line, which is probably not a straight line because the camera is angled. So in terms of consistent energy levels, which are going to be huge for having a very consistent baseline emotional state, avoiding sugar, avoiding high carbs in general, and being in ketosis is one of the best things you can do. And in fact, I've noticed that even though I'm not as high energy in specific moments because I don't have these sugar highs, my overall work capacity is way greater. Every time I get into ketosis, my productivity goes up like crazy. Because my energy level is just so consistent. Whether or not I can work is not dependent at all on shit like, energy spikes and sugar crashes and whatnot. Lastly, something I do want to mention, let me actually check. Okay, so we still have a little bit of battery left. So let me get into this real quick. What I do want to mention is foods that act as endocrine disruptors, and in particular, foods that might fuck up your testosterone levels. The first thing to mention here is soy. This is a bit of a meme, right? Soy boy has become an actual term that is used for a certain type of people. Soy is bad for your hormone levels as a man. Okay, beyond the meme, of weak, wimpy dudes eating soy, soy actually has a negative impact on your hormones. It has an estrogenic effect. So, yeah, just straight up stay away from that shit. There are some other foods as well, but soy immediately came to my mind. If you're interested in that type of thing, I would just recommend you Google estrogenic foods. There are, several different foods that you should avoid in this regard as a man. So I'm not going to go through a whole shopping list here. What I will say is that if you do decide to go on a carnivore diet or on a pastoralist kind of diet that I'm on, you are essentially avoiding all of these foods. You should try to get quality meat, quality dairy products, not made from some shitty, overly processed milk or milk from cows that were pumped full of all kinds of different pharmaceuticals. Try to avoid that. But if you get proper dairy products, proper milk, proper eggs, you're essentially avoiding all of these estrogenic foods that I talked about. So definitely something to think about here. The second thing is that many people who eat a normal kind of Western diet, maybe even something they would consider a slightly healthier diet, don't get enough fat, and especially not enough saturated fat. Saturated fat for a long time has had a sort of bad rep, and this has very consistently stuck around, even though saturated fat is incredibly important for testosterone production. And not getting enough saturated fat can really fuck up your testosterone levels. This is something that I actually had a problem with in the past. I started to get more conscious about my diet, and it's not so much that I thought fat was bad, it's just that the things I was eating, I think I mentioned this in the past as well, were just, like, the food choices I made were just unrelated to whether or not fat is bad, low fat. I was not eating a ton of fat. And I noticed this later when I got on a healthier diet, when I included more fat and especially saturated fat into my diet, that I had severely been lacking saturated fat. And a lot of people do. And again, it's very important for testosterone production, so make sure you get enough saturated fat. And one of the easiest ways of doing that is, again, being on a carnivore / pastoralist type of diet, or a lion diet, or whatever type of this sort of diet you want to hop on. I very much like the pastoralist diet because it has a little more variety. You do have a few different things that you can eat that do taste a little bit different. And it also just makes you more flexible. You can pack some cheese and bring it with you, and it's just easier to eat. Eggs as well are just a lot cheaper than meat, and especially when you're somewhere where it's hard to find quality meat, I'd rather just buy a bunch of eggs. The quality when it comes to eggs is not going to be as different. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. Battery is almost dead. If you guys enjoy yourselves, if you found this interesting, entertaining, more importantly, if you learned something and were maybe inspired to make some changes to your diet, go ahead and leave a like. Obviously, this video was a little bit more rambly than the last two, which is in part due to the fact that I have been recording this right after the last video. But if you have any questions about anything I talked about, or any suggestions for future videos, anything you want me to talk about in the future, go ahead and leave a comment down below. Recording this last part from the ground, from the charging station here, because my phone actually went out on me. If you are interested in a personalized training program or coaching of some kind, go ahead and hit me up on Instagram down below in the description, I think it is. Just DM me and we can see what we can do, talk about details over there. In other news, if you want to see more videos of mine in the future, go ahead and subscribe. I make content on these types of topics, health, practical philosophy, that type of thing, but also a lot of content on fitness, on training. So if that's something you're into, that's something you want to learn about, go ahead and subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next video of this series on male emotion and how to have a very balanced emotional baseline. The next video is going to be on the topic of porn. So yeah, spicy topic. Stay tuned for that. Again, activate the notification bell so you don't miss it. I will see you guys in the next one. And until then, have a good one.